time for us to check back in with the thread that runs so true. If you've missed the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. This is part 2, the thread that runs so true. Jesse, we're so proud of you, Mom said that Sunday in August. I arrived home hitchhiking from Lincoln Memorial University. We're proud to have a college graduate in our family. Larry Anderson is new superintendent of Greenwood County Rural Schools. He's holding a good job for you. It had been 5 years since I had taught school in Lonesome Valley. During those 5 years, I had finished my senior year in Lansboro High School. I had worked 1 year at the Auckland steel mills. I had worked up from standby labor to blacksmith, and I had finished college in 3 years. But I hadn't taken any educational courses at Lincoln Memorial to prepare myself for teaching. I had taken an academic course. I wanted to be the first of my people to finish college. I hadn't planned to teach school again. For when I left the Auckland steel mills, I was ready to take over as a blacksmith. This would have paid me $7 a day. This wasn't as much money as Bill Coffey made, but with a college degree, I had a chance to work up to something pretty good. I had read a newspaper account where one man had done this very thing. He had started with standby labor and had worked himself up to be president of a large steel company. If he could do this, I thought, I could. I could work for the Auckland steel mills and earn money. I could invest this money in the company. I wouldn't spend it for an automobile too big to make the short turns in a narrow road. I'd made up my mind what I wanted to do the night I slept in a church house on my way home. A storm was coming up, and I was walking along the highway. The lightning flashed and the thunder growled across the low, thin-bellied dark clouds. Darkness came suddenly. Several homes turned me down when I asked if I could spend the night. Then I walked and walked through the rain. But in a lightning flash, I discovered the church house. The door was unlocked. I went inside, and the lightning flashed until I could see the organ was covered. I took the cover from the organ and made myself a bed. While I lay on a seat, wrapped in the organ cover, watching the lightning flash around this old vine-covered church, I tried to come to some definite conclusions about my future. One of my decisions, one that was definite, was that I wouldn't teach school. I came to the final conclusion that I would return to the Auckland steel mills where a job was waiting for me. For America was on the boom, and the opportunities for a young, ambitious man willing to work and to strive were unlimited. I knew this by experience. I'd hitchhiked to a small university I'd never heard of before with $29.30 in my pocket, after I'd been turned down by 2 colleges. I thought there was some place that would take me. The college that Abraham Lincoln had asked General Howard to establish for his people accepted me. I'd worked my way through college. I'd bought my books, clothes, paid my tuition, room rent, and board on the 20 cents an hour that I earned. I'd done all sorts of work at Lincoln Memorial. I'd helped dig and lay water lines from the side of one mountain and across another. I'd cleaned manholes and unstopped sewers. I had mown grass over every foot of the spacious campus many times, had worked on the farm and at the dairy barn. I had washed and dried dishes, delivered mail, and for 1 year dried the pots and pans. I had my classes arranged so I could work 1/2 of each day, and I'd worked on the bull gang at the limestone quarry where we blasted giant limestone rocks from beneath the roots of its cedar groves in Powell's Valley, broke them with sledgehammers. I was an expert with a sledgehammer, for I had been a striker in the blacksmith shop at the Auckland steel mills, then crushed them into slag for the Tennessee Highway Department. There was scarcely any kind of work at Lincoln Memorial I hadn't done. There wasn't any kind of work there I couldn't do. And all the outside financial help I had ever received were the 2 $1 bills my mother had sent to me. I had left Lincoln Memorial, hitchhiking home with $10 in my pocket. I owed the school $100. I had made better than B average. Now I was home, surrounded by my people. There was rejoicing because I'd finished college. They were proud of me. At this time, Greenwood County, with an approximate population of 23,000 inhabitants, had less than a half dozen native-born college graduates. Superintendent Larry Anderson had done some college work, but he didn't have his degree. "Mom, I've made up my mind to go back to the Auckland steel mills," I said. "I love to teach school, but remember my salary at Lonesome Valley?" "Son, with all your education," my father said, "you can get in on the ground floor for something good in Greenwood County. You'll make more money now since you're a college graduate. Go see Larry about the job he's holding for you." "Yes, go see him at once, Jesse," Mom approved. "You know I don't want you to go back to the steel mills. First of my people since they left Wytheville, Virginia to get a college education," my father said. "They left Wytheville before the Civil War. I don't know what there was among my people before then." "First college graduate among my people," Mom said proudly, "and I want you to do what my grandfather, Preston Hylton, did. I want you to teach school." "I want you to teach school," she repeated. "I'm proud of you, Jesse. You're going to amount to something. They'll know you all over this county before long. Go see Larry Anderson at once. Go tomorrow." Monday morning, when Larry Anderson came to unlock his office door, I was waiting. "You're Jesse Stuart, aren't you?" he said, gripping my hand. "Yes, sir," I said. "Come in the office," he invited me. "I've been talking to your father about you. I've got a good place for you. You're the right man for the place. See," he explained, "I'm trying to do something for the Greenwood County schools. I'm trying to do something with the amount of money we have to spend. I have school buses to haul pupils to Lansboro High School in the east end of this county, and I have school buses to haul them to Maxwell High School in the west end. But we have approximately 32 miles of hard road cover which our buses run. The rest is dirt road. And beyond where our buses can go are great spaces where the rural pupils haven't a chance to pass beyond the 8th grade, not unless their parents are able to board their children near a high school. I have established 3 rural high schools in this county. I plan to send you to the Winston High School. Since we cannot get these pupils to our large high schools, I'm sending teachers to them." "Who'll be on the faculty at the Winston High School?" I asked. "You'll be all the faculty," he smiled. "You'll have 14 pupils. Your salary will be $100 a month." For a moment I sat thinking. In Lansboro High School I had argued against taking algebra, Latin, and plane geometry. I had once said to Superintendent Herbert that these subjects should not be required. I'd gone even further. I'd said they should not even be taught. I had told him that I would never use them. He replied that everything I learned from my high school subjects would have some value to me sometime in my life. The reason I argued against these subjects was that I failed Latin and plane geometry and got by algebra by the skin of my teeth. "What subjects will I have to teach at Winston High School?" I asked. "Algebra, Latin, plane geometry, history, and English," he said. "I'm afraid I can't teach algebra," I said. "You've got mighty good college marks in algebra," he reminded me. "I have a transcript of your credits right here. That's one reason I'm holding this high school for you. You fit the schedule. We don't have to warp the schedule to fit you." I couldn't tell Superintendent Larry Anderson I had for my roommate at Lincoln Memorial, Mason Dorsey Gardner, who had won the coveted award of $25 for being the best math student. I couldn't tell him Gardner had worked my algebra and I had written his themes. "I'll take Winston High School," I said. "I'll be the faculty." Saturday afternoon in early September, I caught the Rio Speedwagon that carried mail and passengers. I was on my way to Winston High School. I had a suitcase with my belongings. I had with me school supplies allotted a rural school. The Speedwagon was packed with passengers. Women were sitting on men's laps, and children were sitting on the floor and the mail bags. There was a roof over us to keep the sun from blazing down upon our heads. There wasn't anything around us to keep away the wind and dust. Clouds of dust rose up behind us. When the Speedwagon slowed down, the dust clouds swirled in behind and nearly choked us. We rode over the winding trail like a stagecoach in an earlier day, but we went much faster. This was the only communication line between Lansboro and Winston. We followed the Sandy River, and then we went up Raccoon and over a mountain and down into Hinton Valley. Then we climbed another mountain, and when we reached the top, I saw before me, deep down, one of the prettiest valleys I had ever seen. The Tiber River wound slowly through the fertile farmlands like a silver ribbon in the sunlight. We went down this east wall of the valley, around the curves, and up until we came to a store and post office. This was Winston. This was where I got off the speedwagon. I saw only one schoolhouse. This was the Winston Rural School. But I was not looking for the schoolhouse now. I was going to Baylor's, the big white house overlooking the Tiber River. I saw the house in the distance. This was the place where I would room and board. That afternoon, after Lucretia Baylor had shown me to my room, Snooky and Robin Baylor, two pupils whom I would have in Winston High School, went with me to show me the high school building. Though I had seen this dilapidated little building when I passed by on the speedwagon, I didn't dream it was the high school. This squat, ugly little structure had once been used as a lodge hall. The lodge had been dissolved 20 years ago, but the hall still stood, though tumbling to decay. When I walked inside, a bat barely missed my head in its flight to escape. There were wasp nests, mud daubers' nests, and birds' nests above the window. A mavis flew from the nest through a broken window pane in her escape to freedom. I walked outside. I wanted to inspect the outdoor privies and the playground. Of all the thousands of acres of land there were in this spacious broad valley, I had less than 1/16 of an acre for my high school pupils. There was an outdoor privy in each corner of this tiny lot. House weeds grew as tall as the lodge house roof. The community's obscene artist had found these privies. I sent Snooky back to the Baylors to get water, broom, scrub brush, soap, and a scythe. That afternoon, I went to work with two good helpers. We cleaned the lodge hall. We scrubbed ceiling, walls, and floor. We washed the walls of the privies. I scythed the small yard and raked the horseweeds from the lot. Then I hacked down the sharp stubble with a hoe. Snooky, Robin, and I put the schoolhouse, the privies, and the yard in order. We were ready for school on Monday morning. While we were working on the yard, a tall boy swaggered up the road and stopped. He stood there silently watching us. His hair was long, his face was pimpled. He had elongated blue eyes that squinted brightly when he looked at us. His loose-fitting clothes looked as if they would fall from his body. "Hiya, Budge," Snooky spoke as soon as he saw him standing watching us. "How're you, Snook?" Budge said. "Coming to school Monday, Budge?" Robin asked. "Yep, I wouldn't miss it," he said. "Here's your teacher," Snooky introduced us. "Mr. Stuart, this is Budge Waters." "Glad to know you, Budge," I said. I'd never seen a youth in my life that looked anything like him. I'd never seen one with his peculiar actions when he walked. He used his hands to pull against the wind. This strange youth stood silently watching us work a few minutes. Then he walked away, swaggering as he walked and pulling the air with his hands. "Are you kidding me about this fellow?" I asked Snooky. "Is he really a high school pupil?" "I'm telling you the truth," Snooky said. "He'll be the first one here Monday morning. He'll be here by daylight." "How far away does he live?" I asked. "About 7 miles, Snooky said. "Doesn't he have any work to do at home?" I asked. "Plenty of work," Snooky said. "They grow about 10 acres of tobacco every year. They raise corn and cane, too. Old Budge is a good worker." "He might be a good worker," I agreed, "but he's going to find it hard to get through high school." "Don't you worry, Mr. Stuart," Snooky warned me. "If you're not awfully smart, he'll be teaching you." Monday morning when Snooky, Robin, and I got to school, an hour before time to start, 12 pupils were waiting, and I got the surprise of my life. Not one was barefooted. They were well dressed, too, all but Budge Waters. His clothes were new and clean, but they didn't fit his angular body too well. There was one new automobile parked near the school. There were 2 handsome saddle horses tied in the shade of an elm tree, and there was one pony almost as pretty as Sundance tied to the schoolyard fence. The pupils came up and introduced themselves before we started school. There were 6 girls and 8 boys. Before time for school to begin, I was acquainted with them and knew their names. Their schedule was already written on the small blackboard. During my first day, I gave them assignments and we discussed briefly the beginning lessons. With 14 pupils and 5 classes, each 45 minutes long, I had a little time on my hands. It was not like teaching at Lonesome Valley, where I had 54 classes each day. During our brief discussions, I realized these Tiber Valley pupils would not be as easy to teach as my pupils in Lonesome Valley had been. When I taught at Lonesome Valley, I had completed my 3rd year of high school and was only 3 years ahead of my 8th graders. But in training and general knowledge, there was a wide gap between us. I was 8 years ahead of my Winston High School pupils, and I had thought when I took this school there would be a wide gap between us. When I started teaching ancient history, I found one pupil who knew more facts about this subject than I did. He was Budge Waters. He went back to the beginning of the Pharaoh kings of Egypt. He named the kings, gave the dates in history when each served, and told what each did for his country. I asked Budge if he had taken the subject before. He told me he hadn't, but he had read all of his textbooks except algebra that summer. He said algebra was hard for him, the other subjects were easy. Then I asked him to read 2 paragraphs in his history book, and when he had finished, I asked to hold his book. Then I asked him to tell me what he had read in these paragraphs. While he told me what he had read, I followed him in the paragraphs. He quoted the book almost verbatim. Now I knew Snooky Baylor had told me the truth. I asked Budge to read 3 more pages of history aloud to the class and then tell how much he had gotten from the 3 pages. Again, he almost quoted 3 pages. I had heard of photographic memories. This was it. This boy didn't forget either. He had a retentive memory. During my first week at Winston High School, I knew my problem was keeping ahead of these pupils, teaching them the subjects that had been hard for me in high school. I had to go home and work long hours in the evenings. I had to know my lessons. If I didn't, my pupils taught me. They did their assignments, no matter how much I gave them. The amount of work I gave them depended upon how much I wanted to study ahead. I had to study ahead in algebra, Latin, and plain geometry. I had to review my history and English too. I had to prepare 5 subjects. I had accepted Winston High School thinking it was a little place among the hills where my pupils would be the products of rural districts like Lonesome Valley. I had brought along a number of books to read so I wouldn't get lonesome. I wanted to have something to do. I found that I had plenty to do. I had to work to keep ahead of Budge Waters. He remembered dates better than I. When we had disagreed on dates, we looked them up in the encyclopedia, and Budge Waters was always right. Where did this boy get all his knowledge? Where did the other 13 get their information too? Who were these pupils? What was their background? I was faced with one of the strangest problems I had ever known a teacher to have, and here was the place I would least expect to find such a problem. We'll stop right there for today. Interesting turn of events, for sure, for Jesse. Dramatic beginning to this part where he's walking home from the college. Really interesting that, of course, in those days, lots of people hitchhiked, thumbing. Jim Casta calls it thumbing. A lot of people did that, and that was their only way to get places. And it didn't deter them. They just took off, knowing that they'd get there somehow. But really dramatic when he was coming home, and there was a storm, and him trying to asked people if he could stay there, and people turned him down till he found the church, and you can just picture him getting in there and being so thankful to be out of the rain, and taking the cover off the organ and making himself a bed and just laying there in the safety of the church. But that had to be such a wonderful feeling to be like, I'm out of the rain, I'm safe, I'm in a shelter, I'm not getting pelted by the rain anymore. But during that time, he says he really was studying about what he was going to do with his life. And now 5 years had passed, like he said, since he was at Lonesome Valley. So we've missed that part of his life. But during that time, he tells us what he was doing. First, he was working at the Auckland steel mills, and he was working as a laborer, but made up to a blacksmith, and that was like a step up. And then also he wanted to go to college. At this point in Jesse's life, sounds like, it's what he's saying, is that he really wanted to go to college more just to say, I went to college, than to actually teach or do anything. I think he was really rewarded at Lonesome Valley by the growth in the children that he's seen and his success, but then he really got burnt out too because he didn't really make any money, and as he keeps telling us, this was during the years that America was just booming, and if you had that work ethic and really wanted to go somewhere and apply yourself, you could make a lot of money. But I love that dramatic kind of start to this part where he's in the church, and then the sun comes out again and he gets all the way home, but then his mom and daddy just will not have that he's not going to be a teacher. They just won't have it. They're so proud of him, but they just won't have that there's any other option. Now, he's already knows that he's got that job at the Auckland mills that he could make $7 a day, but yet he goes and talks to Mr. Anderson, and maybe because of his parents too, and maybe because deep inside he really did want to be a teacher, he just wanted to make more money. Whatever the reason, he ends up taking that job that's less than half of that, so he's going to get paid $100 a month. He says there at the end that part of the reason is he thought it would be an easy job. He thought, well, I'll have students kind of like the Lonesome Valley students, but I only have 14 of them, and they'll all be, closer in the grade levels because they'll just all be in high school. So maybe that was part of it. Such a different world, though, when you think about it. You go back to him walking there and the thumbing and the all of that. Such a different time and such a different world that it's hard for us to even understand. I can't imagine today, like if I said I need to go to Murphy and pay my taxes, get something at the store, whatever, or even if I just needed to go to Clay's, that I would just start walking and hope that somebody would pick me up. Of course, today I'd be afraid of who picked me up, unless it was somebody I knew intimately, that I really knew. But in those days, people didn't think about that. Now, I'm sure there was people that picked you up and took advantage of you. The vice versa of that is that when you're driving yourself, you can't, it's just the world we live in. You can't with good, clear conscience, because you're too afraid, I am, to pick up somebody unless it's somebody I know personally. I used to pick up Danny Wilson all the time, but I knew him personally, knew him my whole life, knew what kind of person he was, and he never drove, and he was walking to work, usually. He was walking to his job. Anyway, but just such a different time. Really wonderful to hear about all that hard work Jesse did. That's one thing you couldn't accuse him of being, was not a hard worker. When he was at Lincoln Memorial, he had to do all those jobs, all those extra jobs, so that he could pay for actually getting to go there. So he worked half a day and then he went to school half a day. But he did some really hard work. You think about cleaning out sewers. Matt's had to do that lots in his life as a maintenance worker before he come home to help me. I have a weak stomach, so I can't even think about that. And then the digging the ditches, and even all the other things Jesse mentioned, even to the cleaning and washing, and especially the using the sledgehammer on the rocks. He really, really did a lot of hard work while he was at Lincoln Memorial. It is interesting to go back to why he took Winston High School, why he decided to take that job. It's less money, but it could be that he did really want to be a teacher. It could be about his mom and dad, really wanting him to be. But then, too, it could be part of it was that he didn't want to fess up that actually my roommate's been doing all my algebra, and that's why I had those good grades. And I was just writing all his papers, all his themes, and that's why he did okay. He didn't want to fess that up and let people know that he was dishonest on that. Reminds me of a story. I've probably told this before, I think, in one of the other books we read, but when my older brother Steve was in, I don't know if he's in 6th or 7th grade, something like that, he had a teacher, Mr. Caldwell. I had the same teacher for my 6th grade. But at that time, he was giving Steve a lot of homework, and Daddy, Pap, knew Mr. Caldwell. Charlie knew him well. They grew up together, in this area. And so he run into him somewhere down in Brasstown, and he said, "Charlie, you need to lay off on the homework." and you're giving too much. And he said, well, no, Jerry, Steve's doing a fine job. He's making good grades. And Pap said, he told him, said, Charlie, that ain't Steve's grades, that's my grades. I'm having to do his homework for him. Anyway, I love that story. It's funny. I can't remember because Steve's, 5 years older than me, but that's just the funny story. But when I come along, I didn't want nobody to help me with my homework because I figured Granny and Pap would mess it up. I thought I knew better, I wanted to do it. And I can't remember with Paul. I think Paul just didn't care until he got in college, and then he was like, top of his class, graduated both colleges, top of his class and all that. But in elementary school and high school, he just didn't really care, and he just done as little as he could to get by. And then once he got to college, he really applied himself and, like I said, won awards and done really well. But that's what that reminded me of, them doing each other's homework. And the Rio Speedwagon, of course, I couldn't help but think about REO Speedwagon, one of Katie's favorite groups. It's funny that I used to listen to them when I was a girl, and then she'd become enamored with them all these years later. But that was just comical for me to read that. But then that ride, that's really descriptive too, thinking about them riding and the women sitting in the men's lap because it was so crowded, and the mail bags, and the kids in the floor, and the kids on the mail bags. And then every time they'd make a stop, all that dust behind them would just come forward, billowing over them, and it would be so dusty and about choke them to death. Really descriptive writing of Jesse's there. And then when when they get to where they're going, as they go over the last little mountain there, the description of him seeing where he's going to be, again, oh my goodness, I wish I could have seen it, with the Tiber River there looking like a ribbon, and just all the beauty that he's seen. Once he got there, then he found a totally different place than he had in Lonesome Valley. So he had in his mind, this is going to be a really rural area. Again, I'm going to be dealing with kind of the same thing I did in Lonesome Valley. But he was really shocked to find out that he was not. For one thing, sounds like it was a wealthier place. So not only did the kids not come to school barefooted, but they were dressed better. And then one of them even drove a car. And then they had the horses and the pony. And none of that was at Lonesome Valley. And you got to know that those children, the 14 students there, that their parents were wealthier, because if not, they would have needed that car. They would have needed those were all kind of extra things. We can send those to school with the kids and we won't need them during the day. So really interesting, that part is the drastic difference. And then also the drastic difference in their education. So then we go back to Guy and Ova, how old they were. And they were in the first grade. And then you've got here Budge Waters and the others that are, they're so on top of things that Jesse's having a hard time teaching them. He's having to go home and teach himself so that he can teach them. So such a drastic difference. And, all those questions there at the very end that he's asking, I have those same things. Well, was it an area that was... had better resources, maybe? There was more timber, there. You think about timber in those days, there was money in that. Was there more fertile fields for growing, like that 10 acres of tobacco that Budge's family did? And they also grew corn and cane. So was it just a better fertile place for growing things? But then about therefore that meant that they were wealthier people. But then what about their schooling? Had they that little rural school there? Was it just must have been a top-notch school to then feed into the high school there? So lots and lots of questions. I love the part when the two Baylor kids there help him clean everything up at the old lodge, and one is that he said a mavis flew out the window, and I thought, even though I've read this before, I probably wondered it before, but I didn't look it up. I thought, what is a mavis? What kind of bird is a mavis? Well, I'm terrible at birds. Sometimes people ask me, Tipper, what was that bird I heard in your video? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know the calls and the sounds. I know the ones that sound like home, but I don't really know what's making what sound. But I looked up that, and it said a mavis is an old, like a very old, even like from Shakespeare times, of another name for a song thrush bird. So I thought that was really interesting that Jesse was using that really old term. And then at the end there, meeting Budge Waters, what a character! Can't you just see him? And then he's got that photographic memory. I've always wished I had a photographic memory, but I sure don't. And the older I get, the more I wonder how I can forget the things that I do and that I can't think of. And I mean, sometimes I get worried about myself. In my recent video with Granny, somebody said, "Tipper, I think she's sharper than you are." It's the truth. It's no joke. It is. So sometimes Granny will tell me something that I'm like an old memory or something, and I'm like, I don't. And then I remind myself, she don't forget nothing. So I'm sure it's true. I'm sure it happened exactly like she says. And whereas I forget everything, it's a wonder I can tell you what I ate for breakfast this morning. I probably couldn't, except I ate the same thing every day, so that makes it easier. Anyway, I really enjoyed this part, we started the second part of his book here. I hope you did. And please leave a comment and tell me what jumped out at you. And I hope you'll drop back by next week, because we've got to see how he manages to continue to learn so that he can teach these wonderful 14 students that he's got at this new high school.